on. There we go. So we're now being recorded in case anyone feels they should be notified. In terms of this session and its questions, the procedure will be, in order to maintain momentum, we're going to ask the speakers to keep going right the way through, and we're going to ask if you could actually put your questions into the chat box. So let me start sharing the screen, and hopefully we can start to make some inroads into the slides. So I shouldn't forget, of course, to welcome not just BFPA members, but also those members of the EMA associations who've also joined us today, MTA, GTMA, BTMA, and BCAS, and of course our secretary from the Engineering and Machinery Alliance. You're all very welcome, and thank you for joining us. The focus of today's webinar is fairly clear. I'm only going to take a moment. I think we all remember that on Christmas Eve, we had a message from our Prime Minister that sounded very upbeat. And I quote directly from the TCA, the Trade Cooperation Agreement, which said, "We'll enable UK goods to be sold without tariffs into the EU market." And of course, what Boris forgot to mention at that point was, as long as we meet all of the rules of origin and we have all the right paperwork and the codes and the commodity codes and so forth. And of course, as we all know, and BFPA are acutely aware of it from the plethora of inquiries that we've had from members and requests for help, this has been presenting somewhat of a challenge to everybody in the UK market. And then, of course, there's the added complication of the Northern Irish Protocol and those all-important product and commodity codes. So if you can identify with the poor chap on the left-hand side of your screen now, what we're going to try and do as BFPA is give you a lifeline. Let's try and take away some of that confusion and bring you back to the surface. And in doing so, we will, of course, also provide you with some very key links, and you'll be able to communicate with the speakers after this event as well. So we can't do this on our own. We need, of course, as we've had on many occasions, the help of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or BEIS, in the form this time of Amy Brooks, who is involved in trade and investment negotiations at BEIS. We're also pleased to have James O'Neill from Harman Customs with us. And after they've undertaken their presentations, as I say, we won't take questions during, in the interest of speed. We'll then have a large dedicated Q&A session at the end. So place your questions in the chat box. Myself and Sarah Gardner, who many of you know, most of you know, I should think, will be beavering away during the presentations, tracking the questions. And at the Q&A session, we'll either read them from the chat box, or else we'll invite you to deliver them in person if you want to at that stage. So at that point, I'm going to hand over control to Amy, who's going to start the process today. And if you can give us one moment, hopefully Amy has taken control of the screen. Are you able to do that, Amy?
I think it is just loading. Let me give it a go.
There you go.
There we are. Yeah, seems to be working.
Excellent. Okay, Amy, over to you. I won't spend a lot of time adding additional introduction, other than to say a big thank you to you for your help. And we're all eagerly awaiting an instant, ready-made solution to all our OO problems.
Excellent. Hopefully I can demystify some things. Hi everyone, good afternoon. I was about to say good morning, but good afternoon. As Chris has said, my name is Amy. I work in the Rules of Origin team in Department for Business. So today I'm going to run through a quick presentation on the kind of basics, I suppose, of Rules of Origin, with a couple of specific examples which hopefully will be relevant to members on the call. Very happy to take questions at the end, or if they're a bit more technical or if they're a little commercially sensitive, very happy to take kind of written questions afterwards as well. And thank you, I should say, as well to Chris and Sarah for organising this and having us today. So very briefly, I'm sure you're all very aware now, I won't run through this in detail, but the UK is no longer part of the EU Customs Union. Our trading relationship with the EU is now governed by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or the TCA. And as Chris said, the Northern Ireland Protocol applies to Northern Ireland, trade with Northern Ireland. So as of the 1st of January this year, UK goods exported to the EU and EU goods exported to the UK are eligible for zero tariffs. However, the kind of key requirement of this is that goods must meet rules of origin requirements set out in the agreement. So the principle of zero tariffs in the trade agreement is that that zero tariff benefit is open for goods kind of made, manufactured in the UK or in the EU. Try and change the slide. I'm not sure if I have control anymore of the slides. Oh, maybe there's a slight delay on my end, apologies, I'll carry on. So rules of origin determine the economic nationality of a good. They're a very standard part of free trade agreements. Today, I'm going to be talking specifically about the rules of origin for UK-EU trade. So if you are trading under other UK trade agreements, rules of origin will apply, but just be aware that they do differ between trade agreements. So you just have to be aware that the rules of origin for your products in one agreement may be the same or may be different in another agreement. So just important to check those specifics, really. One thing I wanted to set out very quickly before I delve into the detail is the distinction that trade agreements make between distribution and production. So to export your goods tariff-free between the UK and EU, there has to be a qualifying level of production or manufacturing in the exporting party. So what I mean by that is, if you're exporting a product from the UK to the EU, there must be some level of processing or manufacturing in the UK before that product is exported to the EU. If you are bringing in a product from the US or anywhere in the world into the UK and simply kind of distributing that to the EU, that product is unlikely to qualify for rules of origin, under rules of origin requirements. Don't panic, because there are other options if this is your business model. So there are other special customs procedures that you might be able to use to avoid paying the tariffs coming into the UK and the tariffs coming into the EU. And we can touch on those a little bit towards the end of the presentation as well. But just wanted to set out quite clearly that there does need to be some processing or production in the exporting party to comply with the rules of origin. So how do I comply with rules of origin? There are broadly three key steps. First is to classify your goods for the purposes of international trade. The second is to understand whether those goods meet their applicable rule of origin. Now, different products, different sectors can have very different requirements for rules of origin. And I will run through some examples, and in particular, some examples I think will be relevant to members on the call as well. But again, just be aware that the rules do differ between products. And the final step is understanding how to actually demonstrate that you meet that rule of origin to the customs authorities. I won't run through this in detail because I think James is going to give a much more knowledgeable presentation about classification after me. But just very quickly touching on it, because it's of course very important for origin, is classifying your goods. So goods are classified under the harmonised system. And really, for the purposes of rules of origin, you need to be familiar with the first 6 digits code of the harmonised system, which, as the name suggests, is harmonised globally pretty much. So I've just put an example of fuel, lubricating or cooling medium pumps for engines, which are classified under Chapter 84, which is machinery, heading 8413, which is pumps for liquids, and then subheading 841330, which is that very specific type of liquid pump. So as you can see, goods are classified at an increasingly specific or detailed level. And rules of origin can apply at either the chapter level, the heading level, or the subheading level. So either the 2-digit, 4-digit, or 6-digit level, which is why it's really important to be familiar with those 6 digits. But I'll let James kind of go into more detail on that shortly. Once you have found or classified your goods, so found the classification, you then need to look up what the applicable rule of origin is for your product. Now, there are two main ways of finding this rule. The first is actually in the trade agreement itself. So there is an annex, which I'll link to at the end of this presentation. There is an annex called Product Specific Rules of Origin, and there is listed all of the tariff codes for every good you can imagine and the corresponding rule of origin. The other way you can look up what rule of origin applies to your good is by using the Department for Trade's tool called Check How to Export Your Goods. So in that tool, you can put in, I am exporting from the UK to Belgium, this is my product, and it should tell you what the applicable rule of origin is. So again, I'll link those at the end, but just to make you aware of the different ways of how you can find the particular product specific rule. Like I said, rules differ between products, but there are generally 4 types of rule that a product might need to meet in order to qualify as originating in techie trade terms. The first type of rule is known as wholly obtained. This generally applies to agricultural products, sometimes also mineral products, but it typically means that, for example, if a vegetable is grown and harvested in the UK, it would be wholly obtained from the UK. And typically those goods would automatically qualify for origin purposes if they've been wholly kind of grown, extracted, born, etc. in the UK. Now, rules 2 and 3, I think, will be most relevant to those on the call, and I'll go through some examples in a second. But as an overview, the second type of rule is known as a change in tariff code rule. And what this rule means is that if you are importing parts from outside the UK and EU, so outside the free trade area, essentially, those inputs or materials have to be classified in a different classification code than the final product that you're exporting. And this rule is meant to show that you're importing one type of product, you're transforming it into a totally different type of product, and that's what you're exporting. The third type of rule is often referred to as quite a classic rule of origin. It's known as a value-added rule, or actually in the agreement, in the legal text itself, it's known as a maximum non-originating material rule, and you might see that as MAXNOM as an abbreviation. And what this rule requires is that, or what this rule sets, is a limit on the amount of non-originating inputs, materials you can have in your particular product. And when I say non-originating, I mean not originating in the UK or the EU. So if you're importing parts into the UK from Japan, India, anywhere outside the UK or EU, those would classify as non-originating parts. The threshold differs between products. If you're manufacturing or dealing with goods in the machinery chapter or similar kind of machinery electronics chapters, for the UK EU deal, 50% is quite a good rule of thumb, but that threshold does differ between some products. So again, just very important to check that it may be different than 50%. The final type of rule, and then I'll run through some examples, is known as a specific processing rule. This often applies to products like textiles, chemicals, where there is a very particular set of operations that are carried out on those products. So for example, for a clothing product, the deal might state that in order for that product to be a UK origin product, you have to carry out knitting and weaving in the UK. So it'll be very tailored to the particular product. Most kind of machinery products, I know there are also some, most machinery products don't really have a specific processing rule. I know there might be some members on the call who deal with plastics and polymers. There might be some specific processing rules in those chapters, so worth looking out for. Some companies do find that it might be a little bit easier to prove that you have complied with a particular set of processes rather than the value add option, for example. I just wanted to drop this on a slide in case anyone is unfamiliar with ex works price, but the UK EU rules of origin are typically based off of the ex works price of a good. So where I said before that you might have a threshold of a maximum of 50% non-originating content, that is 50% by value of the ex works price of the final good. So this is the definition from the legal text. Many of you may be familiar with it as an Incoterm. We generally say that ex works price is the price of the good as it leaves the factory floor, so not including any onward transportation or anything like that. A really important additional requirement under rules of origin is that any processing you're doing to a good in order for it to qualify under rules of origin must be deemed as sufficient production. So the text itself actually lists a series of processes that are considered insufficient to confer origin on a product. So for example, simple assembly of parts, simple placing in bottles, cans, etc., simple painting and polishing operations. Now, you kind of have to make a judgment yourself, or potentially you might want to talk to a kind of customs agent or someone to support you in determining whether you think your production goes beyond these processes. There is going to shortly be some additional guidance published on these, because I understand that it can be a little bit of a grey area. For example, simple painting and polishing wouldn't qualify. However, if you use special skills or specialised machinery, that would mean that painting and polishing might go beyond simple, so it might be complex essentially, and that then might qualify you. So we will be publishing some additional guidance on this, and I'll share it with Chris and Sarah when it's published to share around the group. And final main point before just jumping onto some examples is an article called cumulation. So we agreed what's known as bilateral cumulation with the EU. And what this means is essentially, as a UK manufacturer, you can count EU components, parts, materials towards meeting rule of origin when you're processing them in the UK. So I like to just say it's what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. It makes it a little bit easier for manufacturers to hit those thresholds and meet rules of origin. So anytime the agreement talks about any kind of restrictions on using non-originating materials or components, non-originating, like I said before, means anything from outside the UK or the EU. So you can count UK and EU components as originating. So for example, that 50% threshold, you would be able to use both UK, EU component parts rather than just UK. So a couple of examples, and forgive me because I'm not an expert in your sectors, but thanks to Sarah, we have some hopefully relevant examples. So the first one I wanted to talk through is a mini hydraulic power pack. Now for this product, 841360, there is actually an option of 2 different rules that you can comply with. So either a change in tariff subheading, so that's that change in tariff code rule I mentioned before, and in this instance, it applies at the 6-digit HS code, or a maximum of 50% non-originating material. I'm just going to talk through how the change in tariff subheading rule works in this instance. So that change in tariff code type of rule can actually apply at the 2-digit level, at the chapter level, at the 4-digit level, which is the heading level, or the 6-digit level, which is the subheading. And what that means is that if you are using non-originating parts in your mini hydraulic power pack, any non-originating parts have to be classified in a different subheading or 6-digit code than that final pack. So for example, if you imported hydraulic valves from Japan, they are classified in 848120. You then manufacture that into your hydraulic power pack in the UK. The hydraulic power pack is classified in 841360. That 6-digit code is different to the Japanese hydraulic valve, so that would qualify as a change in tariff subheading rule. In addition, like I said, your processing has to go beyond insufficient. So the second example below just shows that even if your parts are changing subheading, if all you're carrying out in the UK is very simple assembly, or for example, if you imported a finished hydraulic power pack and simply kind of polished it or packaged it and exported it to the EU, excuse me, that would likely not qualify under rules of origin because you have to make sure that that production is sufficient. And then taking the same product, looking at the other type of rule you can use, a maximum 50% non-originating material. Like I said, this is 50% of the ex works price of the product. So a minimum of 50% of the ex works price of that hydraulic power pack has to be UK or EU content. And by content, I mean parts, materials, but also labour, manufacturing costs. So, for example, if you imported those valves from Japan again, an electric motor from Taiwan, parts from across the world, and you then manufactured them into a hydraulic power pack in the UK, and your UK labour and manufacturing overheads were, say, 50 or 60% of the ex works price of that hydraulic power pack, that would then qualify because the non-originating parts are worth less than 50% of the value of the pack. Like I said, that 50% does change sometimes for different products, but for products classified in Chapter 84, that is generally 50%. So for this product, you have the option of using either of those rules. For some products, it might just be one rule that you have to comply with. And for a small subset of products, there might be two rules that you have to comply with. So it might say a change in tariff heading and a maximum of 50% non-originating material. I think hopefully most of you on the call should have the option of an either or, but I just wanted to flag that in case it does say and, that means you have to comply with both, excuse me. So just talking through, I think, a final example of a hydraulic hose assembly. So like I said before, the processing that you carry out in the UK or in the EU, if you're exporting to the UK, has to go beyond insufficient. And the agreement does set out kind of what is considered production and what is considered sufficient production. So things like assembly, testing, likely would not pass the threshold to be sufficient production in the UK. So if you're importing, for example, a rubber hose from China, steel fittings from Italy, you have to prove that the production you're doing in the UK does go beyond insufficient. I think I will skip through that slide because I'm aware that I've been talking for a while. I want to leave time for questions. And finally, I'll share these around so you can have a look at the examples, but I just wanted to touch on an example of that distribution model that I mentioned earlier. So for example, if you import a hydraulic power pack from the EU, you bring that into the UK and then you store that in a warehouse and it's released into free circulation. You cannot send that hydraulic pack back to the EU tariff free unless there is some processing done on the hydraulic power pack. So there are ways that you can avoid paying the duty going both ways. So for example, if you store that hydraulic power pack in a customs warehouse, if it doesn't enter free circulation in the UK, there's also potentially the option to use returned goods relief. So if that hydraulic power pack is unchanged and you're exporting it back to the EU, you might be able to claim returned goods relief, so essentially a relief on the tariff from the EU when you export it back to the EU. And we can share some guidance around, again, that HMRC have developed on what the different options are if this is your business model and there's not really significant processing happening in the UK. So final few slides from me is just to talk through how you prove to the Customs Authority that your good qualifies for zero tariffs, so your good qualifies under rules of origin requirements. Now, there are two main ways that you can prove to the Customs Authority, or that you can claim for zero tariffs or claim origin with the Customs Authority. Firstly, you as the exporter can complete a statement on origin and send this to the importer. Now, the statement on origin isn't a separate document in itself. It's a kind of block of text that is actually set out in the agreement, and you can put that on an invoice or a commercial document and fill in your details. The template itself, I think I might have it on a slide actually. Yeah, so the template itself is in the agreement. And as you can see, you can just essentially copy and paste that text and put it onto a commercial document. And that is essentially the exporter saying, I declare that the product that I am exporting meets its rule of origin and is eligible for zero tariffs. The second way that you can prove to the Customs Authority that the good qualifies is what's known as importer's knowledge. Now, using importer's knowledge, you don't, as an exporter, need to provide a statement on origin. The importer, as it suggests, declares to the customs authority that the good qualifies and that they are satisfied that the good that they're importing qualifies. So in this instance, the importer might want to ask the exporter for some information on the product. That might be the kind of definitely the tariff codes, it might be values, it might be where the materials and components have come from. I think I have a slide, a few along, which shows the type of information an importer might want to ask for if using importer's knowledge. So again, we'll share these around so you can have a look through. And it's a choice, but it's a commercial decision between the importer and the exporter whether they use a statement on origin approach or importer's knowledge. I just wanted to flag, actually, because we've had a few questions about certificates of origin. Certificates of origin are sometimes a way that you can prove origin in a trade agreement, and you might have to go and have your certificate of origin stamped by a chamber, for example, to prove that your goods meet origin requirements. That's not a feature of the UK-EU agreement. So for some other UK agreements, you might need to source a certificate of origin and have that stamped, but not for the UK-EU agreement. It's more kind of self-declaration based. Last thing from me is that there are two important easements or facilitations in place that run until the end of this year, so 31st of December 2021. So the first is one that we agreed with the EU, and it's on a reciprocal basis to do with supplier declarations. So sometimes when you are declaring that your good meets the rule of origin, you might have to have evidence to back that up. And often that will be in the form of supplier declarations or long-term supplier declarations. What we agreed with the EU is that until the 31st of December this year, you don't need to have those suppliers declarations actually in place, because we're aware that sometimes it can take a little time to source those documents from your supply chain. So if you are trading under zero tariffs, also known as trading under preference, you have to be confident that your goods do actually meet the rules of origin. But in terms of having that evidence, that document in place, you have until the 1st of January 2022 to actually source those documents. Importantly, though, you might be asked to retrospectively provide that supplier's declaration, so it's important to be kind of confident that you will be able to get hold of it at some point. The second facilitation is one that is applied by the UK unilaterally. So as part of the wider staged customs controls that the UK have introduced, you can essentially defer your origin declaration by 175 days, and likewise defer any tariff payment that's due. So you would have to make out a record in your commercial records at the point of the goods entering GB, and then you have to submit a supplementary customs declaration to HMRC within 175 days. And that supplementary declaration would include whether or not you are claiming that the good meets rules of origin requirements. If so, you might need to provide evidence. If not, then a tariff might be due on import to the UK. And this easement only applies to imports into the UK. It's just a unilateral easement that the UK have introduced. And this runs until the 31st of December this year as well. I think, yeah, so that is everything from me. Very happy to take questions after James's presentation, and hopefully there are some useful links on this final slide that will help you find some more guidance on rules of origin and how to determine what applies to your products. I think on that, I will hand back to Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Amy. That's excellent. I'm hoping you can hear me now. I'm now going to give the control to James, and hopefully we'll be able to see his control of the screen. James, are you able to control the screen at this stage?
I'm just trying now, Chris. Thank you. There might be a slight delay too. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm there. Brilliant.
Excellent.
So thanks for that. Thanks for that, Chris. And obviously thanks to Amy as well for her excellent presentation on Origin. My angle is on the bit that kind of happens before you can determine Origin, and that's determining correct tariff classification. So, why is it we're doing this? Well, as Amy's already explained, this is because the UK is now a third country to the EU. So what does that really mean in practice? That means we're having to make customs declarations. And as Amy quite rightly pointed out, we have an easement into the UK at the moment where we're able to defer the customs declaration for up to 175 days. That's an entry into declarants records or EIDR. But essentially a record will have to be made at some point for goods coming into the UK, and obviously vice versa, goods going into Europe, and that easement isn't available for goods traveling the other way. So basically we're having to declare to customs what it is that we're both importing and exporting, and this is something that we're having to do for the first time or for a very long time anyway. So what determines the duty paid? Well, there's three things really. So we're looking at classification, origin, and value. So value is something that we've not really talked about a huge amount, but that the customs value is effectively the invoice value of the goods plus insurance and freight value to port of arrival. So if you have somebody you guys might be supplying on DDP terms to companies in Europe, then there may be a value for freight, for example, that you could strip out of the customs value that would then lower the value for duty payment. But obviously, if you've classified, you've got your classification, you've checked your rules of origin, and you've determined that you have a UK origin, then you can claim the preference. So then the value of the goods is less important. Although I would say that if the value is wrong, then technically you are making a misdeclaration to customs. So it is quite important that we get the value right as well. But this presentation is basically looking to discuss the classification part, which, as Amy says, dictates the rule of origin usually by chapter heading, chapter subheading in the tariff. So we're going to have a look at going through an example of that. But first of all, it's important to understand that there are now two tariffs to look at. So the UK, now separate, has what's called the UK GT, the UK Global Tariff. And then obviously we have the combined nomenclature, which is the EU's tariff. And that's basically determines both the duty and taxes that are paid, and any measures that are attached to it may then be different between the two tariffs. So you may have, for example, one commodity code, and we'll go through this in the example later, that is coded to exactly the same 10-digit code, but then has a different duty rate attached in both the UK and the EU tariffs. So that's it's quite an important point that I want to make, in that if you've looked up your tariff rate for goods entering the UK, you can't assume it's going to be the same duty rate into Europe. So where do we start in terms of classifying goods? Well, as Amy described, we've got the harmonised system, which both the UK and the EU are signatories of. So the harmonised system, as operated by the World Customs Organization, and that system starts at sections. So you have various different sections throughout, and then within each section you have different chapters. So Amy's already provided a couple of slides on how the codes are broken down, but essentially the harmonised system provides the first 6 digits. So you've got your chapter, which is the first 2 headings, the first 2 digits. Then you have the heading, which is the 3rd and 4th, and the subheading being the 5th and 6th. So the tariff is harmonised, or will be harmonised to all signatories of the harmonised system. So wherever you're classifying your goods for import or export purposes around the world, in theory, the first 6 digits should be the same. So sat on top of that, you've got what's called the combined nomenclature. So this is the EU's own nomenclature, and that's the 7th and 8th digits to create your CN subheading. And then that is also really effectively what we use in the UK. And then to get your 9th and 10th digits, which is what you need to declare your goods to customs, you have what's known as a commodity code or a tariff code, and that's the 9th and 10th digits, and that is really what is used in both the UK and any EU member state. They'll be the same. So how do we get to those tariff codes? As in, what rules do we use to interpret the combined nomenclature to give us the correct tariff code? Well, they're known as the general interpretive rules. Now, I've left them in there. I'm not going to go through all of them because we don't have time, but essentially, the general interpretive rules are numbered 1 to 6. 1 and 6 are virtually the same, and 99% of all goods that are classified are in reference to rules 1 and 6. So that rule is effectively that the titles of the sections, chapters and sub-chapters are provided for ease of reference only. Legal purposes, the classification is determined according to the terms of the heading and any relative section or chapter note. So what that means is that the legal text of the heading is what provides the what is important effectively. And obviously, if you can't classify in reference to rule 1, then you move through the different rules all the way through to rule 5, and then rule 6, as I say, is effectively that everything at the subheading level is also has legal effect. So it's so in summary of the rule 1, the terms of the heading have legal force. The notes also have legal force, and it's the most commonly used rule, and that the terms of the subheading have legal force. So for this webinar, I've just put together an example which I hope is relevant to some of your members, and kind of just goes through some of the complexities in how, what is involved in classifying anything really. So here we have hydraulic quick connect coupling. So I've been through and I've had a look at where I think, in my opinion, this particular item is classified. So the starting point was two chapter subheadings, chapter headings 7307 and 8481. And if we just take a minute to just have a look at what those headings read. The first one is tube or pipe fittings, and the second one is taps, cots, valves, and similar appliances for pipes and boilers, etc. So what you've got there within the heading is both the item that it's describing and the item that it's going to be fitted to. So if you read that, if you did a kind of quick scan, you might think, oh, that includes the tube and the pipe itself. It doesn't. It's just the fitting for. And similarly, on the 8481 example, what is actually included in that heading is the tap, cock, or the valve, or similar appliances, but not the pipe. Effectively, nothing that it's attached to. So it's quite the devil's in the details sometimes, and just make sure that you really have a good read through and have an understanding of where the heading, what the heading is actually including and what it isn't including. So obviously, as we can see there, you've got coupling included within the legal text, but then you also have in 8481, valves and similar appliances. So both have some merit there. So where do you start? How do you classify? Well, look at exactly what it is that the product is. So here I've just pulled off a technical specification, which does show that there is a valve as part of the coupling. And then when we move to the specification, I pulled out some key words there being, it talks about thread size, talks about what it is being an interchangeable coupling. It's used in in applications including hydraulic, which we'll see is important when we come on to looking at how the tariff is constructed and further down. So looking at the relevant sections, we start, and that's where you have to start. There's two sections there. We've got the base metals and articles of base metal, and then machinery and mechanical appliances. So chapter 73 is for articles of iron and steel. And then beneath that, you have then 26 subheadings, 7301 to 7306, of which I think 7307 may be an appropriate heading for us to look at. So where do we find this information? Well, we can find it online at the UK Global Online Tariff. It's very easy to Google, and that allows you to then input, either at the to 4, 6, or 8, or 10 even digit level. Then you can put a complete commodity code and it will pull up the measures and the duty rates attached, or you can start by just searching on the first two and seeing where you get to. Similarly, the EU has what's called Tariff, which provides exactly the same information, as in it provides the tariff, and then when you get to the commodity code, it provides all of the duty measures attached to it. So just using the UK global tariff to look at classifying our goods, we can see that once you put in 7307, you then get 3 different options there on the level 1 indent, which you can see on the left-hand side there. There's like a dash, and that's at the 1 indent level. You have 3 options. So it's the options being cast fittings, then other of stainless steel, and then other. So you then have to discount each one in turn, unless you think one of them is relevant. So I discounted the first 2. We've gone for other, which then leads to 4 different 2 indent level descriptions. Again, you have to discount each one in turn, or if you can't discount it, then you, because you think it's relevant, then you would click on that one to see what the next stage was down. So if we explode that down again, to get to the tariff code, you'd see that under other you have 2, 3 indent. Sorry, you have 2, 3 indent level headings, so threaded and other. And because we know from the description that it's threaded, then we would click on that, and then it's down to whether it's used in aircraft or other. If it's not used in aircraft, and certainly from the spec, we can see that it doesn't mention that, then other would be the appropriate heading if we believe this is the right heading to go for. So what sits behind that is what's called the HSEN notes and the CNEN notes, so the Harmonized System Explanatory Notes and the Combined Nomenclature Explanatory Notes. All these notes are not legally binding, but they are persuasive when classifying goods. So the HSEN notes can only be purchased from the WCO. You probably can get hold of some older copies of it online. And these provide a bit more clarity about what is included within each heading. So they are very useful. So looking at the HSEN notes for 7307, we can see that this is for fittings and connecting, tubes to other apparatus. It talks about the thread, and it also specifically mentions couplings. So that sounds quite persuasive. But then there's also an exclusion note as well, and it says fittings equipped with tapscot and valves, etc., heading 8481. So that kind of then leads us to right, well, we have to look at what 8481 might include and what it might not include. So I've just for completeness included some information on 8481 and the various headings. So if we look there, one of the things you immediately notice is that everything under 8481 is discussing a valve of some description. So you've got pressure reducing valves, safety and relief valves, etc. So then it comes down to, well, what is the essential character of this particular item? And it's very much a coupling rather than a valve. It's a coupling that incorporates a valve. So in my view, I'm still thinking more in the line of 7307 rather than 8481, because the essential function of the item is to connect 2 things rather than it being a valve, which obviously is related to the pressure of what's going through it. But just going down there, we can see that we can get to a commodity code at the 3 indent level, other, for valves of the control of oleohydraulic power transmission. So that is a code that warrants some time to look at. Again, we can refer to the notes, which do suggest that the valves, which may be of any type, are included there. So then it's a case of, right, well, we have the 2 codes. I can form an opinion. My opinion is 7307, but ultimately it comes down to where the customs authorities are going to code these goods. Now, any importer or exporter is well within their rights to classify where they think their part is classified. However, if you haven't got a binding ruling in place, then in theory, customers can come in, do an audit, and if they believe that your goods are misclassified, then they can assess you for duty underpayment if there was a duty differential in their favour. So you can apply for rulings, and you can search the rulings that have already been made at the European level. So any importer, any processor or importer that wants to make an application to the customs authorities can do so, and then we can then review those rulings that are desensitized, so it won't show us who the holder is, but it will give us the tariff code related to certain items. So you can do that looking at both the UK. The UK has its own separate database, and then on screen now is the European version, which is BTI consultation, or also known as the eBTI database. So I've just searched on the word coupling just to see what it'd bring up. It brought up a load of things that weren't relevant, but I selected 2 items that did look relevant. One being an Irish BTI that shows that we have a hose coupling that doesn't talk about valves, and then another Italian BTI that shows a threaded coupling. It talks about a female ball coupling and quick coupling or quick release, and it the article is internally equipped with a mushroom valve. So here we have, although I'm not an engineer by any stretch, what that says to me is that a coupling can include a valve and still be classified in 7307. And obviously you can see at the top there, you have the nomenclature code which gives you your full 10 digits. So that is a useful resource in addition to the tariff, the online tariff. So you can use your general interpretive rules to try and work through and get to the right result. And then if you're still unsure, you've got the BTI databases that sit behind, which are useful. And then moving on to the point about the commodity code can be the same. So you could classify this item, get to the same commodity code, 10 digits in both the UK and the EU tariffs, and then different duty rates can apply. So it might be that a number of you just import things from, say, China or the US. They're parts that you just bring in, and your operations are that you bring something in from, say, China, and then you distribute from the UK to Europe. So where both tariffs had a positive rate of duty, let's say they were both 3.7%, then you would be suffering a double duty hit unless you could keep the goods under customs control. And Amy mentioned this earlier, so you might need a customs warehouse or inward processing. And that would be the only way to avoid paying the double duty. In this particular example, you can bring the goods into the UK, into free circulation, there's no duty, and then you'll only pay the duty into Europe if that's where your customer was based. So, and that effectively would be how it was before, when we were all part of the same customs union. So it's so just a bit more about BTIs, or advanced tariff rulings as they are in the UK. That they're really useful because it just confirms, it provides an importer legal surety of coding for where a part may be classified. So it's then legally binding on the holder once it's issued, and it's valid for 3 years. So they're very useful. And that's it really. I think that's me done.
Okay, James, thank you very much indeed.